Hi, everyone. I'm Frank Cifaldi from the Video Game History Foundation, and this is Phil Salvador, also from the Video Game History Foundation, weirdly. In this panel, we're going to talk about preserving video game history. So, just out of interest, was anyone here a year ago for a talk that we did? Okay, we have a handful. So I'm going to reiterate some of the things just because most people weren't at MAGFest last year. But there's a lot of new stuff to talk about as well. So for those who don't know us, we are a charitable organization. We're dedicated to preserving, celebrating, and teaching the history of video games. At least that's what it says on the website. And sometimes when we give this talk, it's like, well, why does video game preservation do we really need to do that here? We're good, right? We like video games here at MAGFest. I take it. Okay, good. Okay. So I think the more interesting question for us is, what does preserving video game history actually mean, right? So I think when a lot of people ask themselves that question, they kind of picture something like this, right? Like, let's get every video game and put it on a shelf. Like that is the preservation of video games. It's like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. We got to support those games, right? We got to play them. So we got to make sure we maintain antique hardware, right? We got to make sure that people can run these things just as they were. Well, that's just console stuff. We're probably going to have to buy like an entire state in order to house every arcade game ever made, if we can even track them down, right?
We have 5 storage units right now? That's like how many cabinets?
Right, yeah. It'd probably fit about 4 in each of our flimsy storage units. Well, and that's just like physical stuff, right? Like, well, are we going to get every digital game ever? Like, we're just going to go on Steam and buy all 10 games that come out every day, right? Where does every video game end? I mean, cell phone games, right? Like, how many cell phone games are there? Like, is that what preserving games is just get all the games, put them in one place? So even then, our take on collecting games, right, is that the games themselves, there's only so much that an historian can extract from a game. Like, we service the video game historian, right? That literally Norm, the video game historian. He is our target audience. But it's just anyone who wants to tell the story of games is kind of who we are in service to as a charity. And we believe that just the game itself is really limiting what one can sort of look at, right? Like, there's some important things, right? What did this game look like? What did it sound like? How did it play? If you're lucky, you have the packaging as well, right? Like in our example, we had the boxes for every game because we spent a lot of money. So you kind of know like how it looked to the consumer on retail shelves. That's all really important stuff if you're contextualizing a game, right? But that's not enough, right? Like, how was it marketed and sold to people? What did people think about the game in their time, right? Like, how was it made? Who made it, right? Why was it made? And that's the kind of stuff that in, grown-up history, like that's the kind of stuff that people study, right? Like film history books. An example I like to give, just an easy one, is Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers, if you play it now, it's still a pretty good game, right? Like, and there is a YouTube video series, right? Like, do you know this, or anyone know this, where they kind of place young kids in front of old media and have them, right? Yeah. So like, we actually have video evidence of what raw dogging Super Mario Brothers is like.
But you're also not coming to it with the context of like you're a kid growing up in the '80s and you just watched E.T. and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well, that's the thing, exactly. Like, it's if you're coming at it raw, like it's a pretty good game, but if you were playing it at the time, it was revolutionary, right? Like, just the concept of the sky being blue was kind of revolutionary. It's a game that is like an adventure with an ending is not, it wasn't new or anything, but it was kind of new to like console gamers. I talked to Howard Phillips about this once, who worked at Nintendo. He's like the first guy in the US to play this game. And I was asking him, like, what were your thoughts as you were playing Super Mario Brothers for the first time? And he was explaining how blown away he was the first time he went down a pipe, and he's like, oh my God, there's more down here. You know what I mean? Like that's, with that context, you kind of understand why the game was revolutionary. Point is, we don't collect games, really. We don't believe that it's in our best interest to collect every video game ever. And, someone else is already trying that, actually. So the Embracer Group, very nice Swedes, they've started an archive. This is a for-profit media company, but they've started an internal archive, and they've been collecting video games. They spent, it looks like $2 million to get over 60,000 games. Currently on Moby Games, which is nowhere near complete. They've got about 150,000 games, and if you do the math, it's a lot of threes in the number, but just ignore those. It would, by their metrics, cost about $5 million to collect every game on Moby Games. We don't have that, so and we don't think that's the best use of our resources. So forget physical, right? Like let's just dump all the ROMs, right? Maybe that's our place in the world. Let's digitize all the games. But no, I mean, like that's being done already. Just because we are a charity with 501c3 status doesn't make us like better equipped to do things that the community is already doing to much better standards than I want to. I don't want to follow redump standards. It's a pain in the butt. I guess my point, though, in finding our place in the world as a charity preserving video games, is that we believe that you need more than games to research history. And the way we sort of divvy that up is we collect items that help you contextualize how games were made and how they were played. That's kind of the two pillars of what we do. So when it comes to archiving game development so that people can access material and understand from it how things were made, we collect things like source code and tools, original concept art. That's actually concept art from Grand Theft Auto 1, which I found in a press kit. And no one ran it at the time because no one knew what Grand Theft Auto was going to be yet. It's just something people ignored. These sort of prototype unreleased games and stuff. And understanding the people who made them, right? Like being able to access, oral history, interviews, things like that.
I do like how this implies that we collect people.
We collect people.
We don't.
Yes. we collected every Scottish person in that photograph. That is also Grand Theft Auto. We were digging things up for, does anyone watch No Clip, Danny O'Dwyer's? Yeah. We were digging up Grand Theft Auto stuff for Danny's documentary on DMA design. And so that's actually from the same press kit, a photo of the team that made Grand Theft Auto. And again, no one ran this. No one has this unless you're like us and you have these old press kits lying around that you're digitizing. So that's kind of how we try to capture how games were made, or how we believe people should capture that. And then when it comes to how they were played, we think digging up contemporary material from the time, especially things like magazines, we're really big on magazines. And sort of documenting for more modern stuff, especially how were fan communities sort of discussing games, right? What were the speculation, rumors online, things like that. And I don't know why the slide's here because I'm gonna skip it. We actually kind of think that people are pretty bad video game historians. I know that sounds rude, but are we not loud enough? What's up?
We got a message that something wasn't working.
Okay.
Is it working now? From what you could tell, is it
Hello.
Yeah, mics weren't working earlier. I think we're good now.
Okay.
We're good? Okay, cool. So we kind of think in general people are pretty bad video game historians. There's a lot of, stuff out there that's just not right. The Tetris block fake thing getting on Jeopardy is just the funniest thing that's happened with this. But, if Kelsey Lewin were here, she couldn't make it this year, unfortunately. She'd be screaming about her boy Yokoi there not being a janitor at Nintendo. That wasn't true. Something that we kind of get frustrated about a lot is that E.T. on the 2600 is kind of seen as like the worst video game ever made. It's like wasn't even the worst reviewed that month in magazines. Like it's not a great game, but it's not this industry destroying game, right? I'm not gonna name names, but they're like even in modern history books, they're still being printed. There's just inaccuracies. Like neither one of these things is true. Super Mario Brothers was there on day one when the NES launched here. I promise. I wrote a huge article about it. And then that disinformation tends to get repeated in other history books and on Wikipedia, and that's just.
I think there's this phenomenon where I think a notable person, a reputable person, will say something slightly inaccurate. It will get reproduced without the original source behind it, and you can't really go back and verify that. So it just kind of morphs into these slight inaccuracies, which is why it's important to have the kind of sources we're collecting to be able to actually go back and verify these things.
Exactly. So, this is one way to think about it, but we don't think it's anyone's fault. We just kind of think the tools suck. It's really hard to get at primary source material, right? It's really hard to get at contemporary material from the time. A really good example, like we're really big on magazines. There's photos later. You'll see how many magazines we have. But let's just say, using E.T. as an example, it's kind of like look at the old days. So this is a really good magazine from the early 80s-ish. Video Gaming and Computer Gaming Illustrated. So let's say you want to study what was published in this magazine. This is from WorldCat, which is something you're very familiar with, I'm sure, as a librarian.
Yeah, it's the sort of global database where if you are a library, you can put up your catalog entries in there so you can see if there's libraries near you that have something, which is very useful for finding unusual books, which happens surprisingly frequently.
So there are 2 libraries in the entire country that have any issues of Video Gaming Illustrated. Strong Museum of Play, of course, acquired Kevin Gifford's private collection of video game magazines. MSU apparently has this, but they have 2 random issues. Like that's the state of things. Luckily, this magazine in its entirety has been scanned because there are incredible scanning groups putting things online. For now, like the current way that we get things online, what you're seeing in the background there is the Internet Archive, and the Internet Archive, unfortunately has to respect takedown notices from copyright holders. So here's Replay Magazine. Replay Magazine was scanned by Gaming Alexandria, and it's no longer on the Internet Archive. It's basically there's a torrent if you know where to look at this point. That is the surviving digital access point for the biggest coin-op trade magazine in the country, because they're still around and they're like, no, take our stuff offline. We sell back issues. They do sell back issues. It's crazy. Like you can buy brand new 80s issues of Replay from them for like $30 or something. We kind of fear this future, right? I say future semi-ironically because that is the publisher that is the most litigious when it comes to this stuff. Okay, so that's not online. It's been wiped, right? So let's go to a magazine. Go get the physical ones. Oh, this looks familiar. The Strong has some. Library of Congress has some. They stopped collecting it 20 years ago, but they have some issues.
Well, if we need it, we can take like a couple hours for MAGFest and go to the Library of Congress and spend an hour waiting for them to retrieve it, and then come back and MAGFest is over. So,
and these are very random issues. I believe this magazine started in the 70s. Their collection starts in 96 and ends in 2001. Still going. And that's just magazines, right? Like what about this sort of developer stuff, right? What about this sort of internal developer material, like this source material we have for the Starflight series that was donated to us. So that's sort of the the what we're not doing. Like what are we doing, right? Like how are we addressing this? There's a lot of things, but let's talk about 5 things. First thing is Phil.
I'm new here. Hello.
So Phil is our full-time librarian. We've been building a library. I mean, honestly, this started as my personal collection like 20 years ago, but we've been building a library of mostly printed materials. There is, of course, a tribute to Bubsy, who, as we all know, died a year ago. It was really sad. But do you want to talk about the sort of physical archive?
Yeah. So this is, this office is new as of last year. essentially. It's fairly new. The way I like to think of it, my job as a library director at the foundation, and we have a panel about all this on Saturday. If you're interested, we're going to get much more in depth about it. But the way I kind of think about it is that over the years, we have accumulated a lot of stuff. We have a lot of magazines. We have a lot of books. As Frank mentioned, I think we have on site 7,000 magazines, I think is kind of where we're thinking on site with more.
Like you cataloged, not me.
I think officially we're at like 6,500 in the catalog. There's more off-site in storage.
Yeah.
And a big part of it has been turning stuff into a resource people can use. I think a lot of folks, again, I think there probably are collectors here as well, have like shelves full of things. And it's like, how do we make this useful for people trying to do research? What thing is going to be useful for helping them navigate it? So it's not just like, part of it is figuring out what all we have and like finding, the issues that are hidden back behind something that we didn't know we had. But part of it is also just making it so it's like, if you need to research a certain subject, what information do you need? What's going to be helpful for navigating it? What is better than just having a Google Drive full of 6,000 PDFs? Like, that's the value we can bring being a library. Like, so that's been a pretty significant part of things recently, has been just turning it into a discoverable resource.
I can't wait for someone to study the Bubsy plush toy, which was donated by Jeff Gerstmann and is filthy. So I don't know what that's about. Thing number 2, we don't collect all the games. We collect the ones that are going to die, right? So we try to collect media that's one of a kind, that's a game that never actually came out, that is literally like endangered, right? Like might actually disappear from the entire world if someone doesn't step in. And to me, this is a really good way of using what is uniquely us, to make a difference in the world. Like, we have a lot of credibility in, I come from the video game industry, right? Like, I used to produce games, like people know me. They sort of trust us because we have a nice logo and a clean website. You know what I mean? Like,
it used to just being like, hey, I'm Frank. Do you
right.
have stuff?
Yeah. This guy, I know this guy, Frank, like took me pretty far over the years, but I kind of hit a limit, right? Some examples here that we're really proud of, like in the middle top, that is a source disc from Marcus Lindblom, who localized Earthbound on the Super Nintendo. Those were his raw files from when he was making the game, when he was localizing it, and we actually he deleted all the files, but they were still on the disc. So we actually recovered that, and there's this huge article that the CD under that just says baseball. So that was found in the basement of the late Chris Oberth, who was a game programmer. If anyone played Anteater, the arcade game, that's my favorite game of his. This is the original source code for a Midway arcade baseball game that never made it past test. Like, they made like 10 cabinets or something, and it's actually like a sequel to NBA Jam, but it's MLB. So we archived that. We rebuilt it. It's in MAME now. On the right was Phil Food, which is Simcopter 64. That was, again, because of our like sort of status, that was anonymously donated to us by someone who was involved in the game. And I think people in the industry often sort of shy away from what's the nice term that we use? Citizen archivists, right? Like more like ROM group kind of people, and are looking for something a little more suit and tie, I guess, right? Which we try to convey. I'm still super proud of the thing that's on the left, which is we rebuilt the unreleased Sega VR headset that was for the Sega Genesis by finding source code for one of its games, which gave Rich Whitehouse, one of our engineers who's in this photo, just enough clues to sort of figure out like how the thing worked, and you can play this piece of hardware that no one has, including us, recreated in modern headsets. So that's the kind of thing that we feel like we're uniquely suited to do.
And I think it's also important that we add context to it too. Like, I think too often there are things will show up like, here's this weird prototype will just pop up on the internet with no real explanation for it. In the case of Simcopter, like, we know folks at Maxis, we were able to talk to people and figure out the story behind it, and we're able to, bring that to a degree that I think often doesn't happen when there's an obsession with just getting a thing on the internet.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's true of these other things as well, like the baseball game. We we spoke to the people who made the game, and the people who even maybe like own the rights to it were happy that we cared, and you know, they weren't like, oh, don't put our game online and MAME. You know, it's like, just you treat stuff with respect and people appreciate it.
That's the collecting people part of the
Yeah, we collected them. They have been frozen and they are in storage unit number 3, I think.
Yeah, big giant acrylic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thing number 3, we're basement diggers. So this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, which is like, we sort of built up this credibility, right? Like people trust us. We're not just randos on the internet. Like we have a 501c3 status. You know, we have a real office with a Lara Croft statue in it. So we, you know, when we approach people and we're asking them, you know, did you hold on to things from your time in the industry? It's a lot easier to accept the Video Game History Foundation visiting your house than, you know, some guy, right? So we've dug up a lot of cool stuff. Upper left, that's Ed Semrad back there. He used to edit Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine in the 90s, if anyone read that. He and his wife were very gracious, and we dug through literally every box in his basement for like 8 hours or something like that, and dug up a bunch of prototypes. Bottom left is a recent acquisition. So GameSpot is the website GameSpot. They're moving offices, right? And they've decided that they're probably never going to use a physical PC game again, because who does that, right? And so they were thinking of e-wasting all of their PC games, including the Big Rigs. That's the canonical copy of Big Rigs that was used in the Alex Navarro video. So it's like, that must be saved.
I think this is actually a good moment to kind of distinguish how we approach game collecting in this case. I have a CIB copy of Big Rigs. It's a very long story, but like, I don't think we're interested in that. We're more interested in having the one that has contextual significance.
You know, the box in the middle, that was a video game magazine, had kept their stuff, and so they actually allowed us to rifle through what they had and digitize it. On the right there, that's Mike Mendheim, who's the Mutant League guy. He was very happy to hear that we were interested in his career and work, and we shipped all those boxes from Chicago to California, and we have all of his design docs and things like that, which is really cool. Thing number 4, very hard, is digitize the heck out of stuff with these very real and not at all staged photographs
I was supervising on the photo on the left.
Yeah, that's how you scan magazines, right? Like we, all 3 of us.
But that actually is an accurate representation of the amount of labor required to digitize things. It is harder and more expensive than people expect.
Yeah, how many nerds does it take to digitize a CDI magazine? But the point is that, like, you know, I kind of had the slide earlier where it's like, dump all the ROMs? Nah. Well, you know, basically what the slide is trying to convey is that, sure, it's cool we have this physical space. That's not how people study video games. They don't go to the physical library and pull the things. Like, we're actively, and it's too soon to like show anything, but it's really being worked on. That is Phil's job.
My full-time job to make this actually happen.
Is building a digital access point for our collection. Will we digitize literally that entire library, or is it? Probably not. You know, that's I don't.
And a lot of that the community has done. Like,
exactly.
You can get scans for a lot of those magazines on the, you know, Internet Archive for now, as we said. But.
Right, and actually, you know, to not reinvent the wheel, we put a lot of work into figuring out which magazines are already scanned online and which aren't. And we went through a process last year where we just dug out all of our duplicates. Like I should have put a photo in here. We just laid them all out on a table, and we found, I believe, 1,100 magazines that we had duplicates of that were not scanned on the internet yet, and now they are. So we found a vendor that just chopped all the spines off, which is why we only do duplicates, right? Like, we want to keep copies intact, but when we get a duplicate, we don't care. And so there's like, well, I don't know what the account is of stuff that made it online because of aforementioned litigious publisher, but we certainly scanned a lot of stuff. And then on the right is literally dumping ROMs. Those are some EPROMs and prototypes and stuff that we have. But are you going to talk about that more on in your panel, the sort of digital vision?
Yes, a little bit more. But I think we recognize, especially with video game stuff, that people expect to be able to get digital access to things. I think the fact that we are a new library gives us a bit of an advantage here, because a lot of the time it's an existing library trying to graft on digital infrastructure. We are starting with a vision of having digital access is where we're coming from. It is a process. Copyright law is fun.
It's fun.
So it's still a work in progress, but we're navigating those challenges. We want to make as much of it accessible. And there's not everything will be even the Bubsy plushie. We can't digitize that.
You don't want to 3D scan that
someone
guy?
Could come up. You can't capture how soft it is.
No, you can't. You're right.
No, irreplaceable. But we are. But that's access is always the end goal. We don't want things to just sit in a shelf. We want people to get to them.
And then finally, we kind of mentioned bringing context to things, but we try to teach history, and in doing so, not just tell stories, but also sort of a board member of ours, Simon Carlos, likes to call it stoking the market. I really like that phrase, which is hey, if you have access to source material, here's how great your storytelling becomes, right? Just some examples here. I mean, we have a podcast called the Video Game History Hour. I hope you're all listening to it because it's awesome. We bring on historians every episode to sort of go into their research and how they do things and tell the stories that they're telling. Upper left is one of the co-creators of Miss Pac-Man, whose name is escaping me because of talking nerves. Kevin Curran, there it is. We did a little pop-up museum at an expo, Portland Retro Gaming Expo, about the making of Miss Pac-Man. I didn't know he was going to be there, but he was there, and he gave a stamp of approval on how we presented the making of Miss Pac-Man. He's actually pointing at a Light Bright. Do you guys know the Light Bright? It's an old toy. So General Computer, the developer of Miss Pac-Man, which is an American game. I don't know if everyone knows that. They used the Light Bright to prototype the sprites, to see how they would look in the game. So we made a Light Bright with Miss Pac-Man on it, and Kevin's like, "Oh, that was my idea." I was like, "Cool, point at it. I'm going to take a photo." And then I did this really awesome video with Ron Gilbert, the creator of The Secret of Monkey Island, my favorite game of all time. And we actually went through, because we have the source code for it. Because again, it's one of those okay, I trust you with this thing that I probably stole, but I'm not going to say that. We did a really great live stream with him where we went through a lot of cut content that I was able to dig from the game. We showed the original Scum scripting language. We did a live Scum scripting in the game to sort of contextualize. This is important to me, to contextualize that Monkey Island is only as good as it is because of how easy it was to script the game. You're not gonna know that unless you see the scripting and how easy it is to just throw a joke in, compile the game, 5 seconds later it's in the game. So those are 5 things. We're doing lots of other stuff. We get calls when companies move or go out of business. I have half a storage unit that's just Telltale right now. I do a lot of LinkedIn creeping, which leads to the basements. We're building the digital archive, as we said. We're trying to prep other libraries with the unique challenges of video game development material. I don't think that. I mean, you worked at another library. If I handed that library a source code repository, would you know what to do with it?
Probably not.
Yeah, so we're sort of trying to build guidelines for things like that.
I think one nice thing too is that since we are kind of doing our own thing with the library, we can use official library rules and stuff where they make sense, and then just kind of go our own way where it makes sense as well. So there are cases where we're trying to figure out how to work with unusual source materials. There's not really a lot of language to describe yet, and it's that can become the standard potentially.
Yeah. Make stuff up. That's how it happens. We're fighting the law. I don't know if we want to talk about that yet.
I can get the very, very short version of
it.
Sure. Every couple of years, the Copyright Office allows people to basically submit petitions saying we need more exemptions to anti-digital lock-breaking laws. The one that happened last cycle, because of various complicated things with lobbyists involved, there's now an exemption that libraries, museums, and archives can provide digital remote access to copy protected software, but not games.
What's a game, Phil?
I don't know. The Copyright Office declined to tell anybody what a game is. They have no definition. It is genuinely just because there was a game lobbyist group arguing against it and not a software lobbyist group. So those are the kind of things that we're like, no, we can fix this. Like, we can help with this. So we're working with groups like the Software Preservation Network, which has brought some of these petitions to the Copyright Office to be like, well, we know games, we can help with this side of things. So that's another 2 years out, I think, until we figure out that one, but in progress.
And then the last thing, it's kind of a squishy one to describe, but we, for example, our office is actually in a game developer's building that works with a lot of publishers. So like we're trying to become like faces that people in the industry sort of start recognizing and being friendly with, right? And like when we're doing things like exposing source code to games, which, oh my God, is like really scary to a lot of game creators and publishers, like we're showing that, like, no, treated with respect, this is the way to go. This is getting people excited about, your material and might make you profitable or whatever. In fact, there is a game that I'll just say it. We had the source code for Disney's Aladdin on the Sega Genesis, and we wrote this big article where we broke it all down and showed how it worked and showed the tools and stuff. And it got people really excited about it. And it actually led directly to a commercial product where they re-released the game and used the source code that we had. Disney doesn't like when I say that, but so, just my background, honestly, is like I was a ROM dumper. You know what I mean? Like, I was a scene kid. That's where I got my start, and I think that's in the DNA of the foundation. And I think, I already did that. Well, how do we start softening that and bridging that connection to the industry and making it not scary for people? And
I think it also benefits across the board with institutions like ours, because like the Strong Museum of Play we mentioned earlier, I think they're the ones leading the way, at least in the United States, in terms of like collecting actual games. And they have prototype materials, they have these things too. So advocating for these changes in attitude also benefits other institutions that have game collections to make them more available. Like the exemption we were mentioning earlier about remote access to games, like I'm not entirely sure how in practice we would end up using that, but like the Strong could absolutely use that extensively. So this is, we want to rise, what am I looking for? Rising tide, all boats, whatever the expression is. But put it together.
So, if there's a theme to this discussion, it's that we don't think any individual, any institution, like preserving games means so many damn things, right? Like no one can just be in charge of that in its entirety. And we think everyone plays a part in this, right? I think I might have written something in the guidebook description about how you can get involved. Like you can, right? Like I want to encourage people to sort of do what we did, which is still evolving and has taken me 5 years to sort of solidify. But find where you fit in the world. Like find what you can uniquely do. We really think this is an ecosystem, and that everyone plays a part. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. I don't have an easy answer for you. But if this stuff is important to you, and if you're sort of recognizing that, like, a lot of this actually is endangered, and I don't want that, right? Just figure out what you can uniquely do and do it, because there's no instructions for this. You got to improvise like we do.
Yeah, for one specific example, I think a lot of times folks think that, we are this like well-resourced giant organization, which it's 3 of us, like we're fairly small.
That's how good the logo is. People think that.
But, we'll occasionally get comments like, oh, you should do something about like, Doom mods or something like that. If you look at the Doom community, they have like the Doom wiki. It is this massive, extensive wiki with like every map cataloged with maps and information of how many, imps are in all of the maps and people's names, and you can see what competition they were made for. It's like, what could we do that's better than that? With let the community that knows all that material and knows the resources do that. Like, I would rather fund the Doom wiki than try to do something on our own.
Yeah, and like getting a little bit in the weeds here. I mean, we're called the Video Game History Foundation partially because that's kind of my goal, right? Is to become something more like a foundation that can offer resources that are needed to projects that we can't do on our own. We're just not there yet because I got to feed Phil.
Librarian salaries.
It took 5 years for us to have employees that were actually paid.
But point being, like, in your community space, there are absolutely ways that you can preserve your own history, even if it's just talking with people and recording it or documenting your local fighting game scene. Like, there are ways, even if you're not, saving Mario Brothers. Like, that's just this giant absurd. Like, there are ways you can contribute in your own communities. Like, that matters for making a portrait of what gaming is.
Yeah. I mean, a common thing that I tell people when they're like, what do I do is it's like, okay, did anyone make games where you live? You know what I mean? Just start looking around, start figuring that out. Because again, like, there's no answer to this, but if you're into scanning, go to the Gaming Alexandria Discord, right? If you're into ROM dumping, like, go to the Redump website and see what they actually need. And anyway, that's all we've got that's prepared. I'm going to keep that open, but I'm sure someone here has questions, right? Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go with hands. So, yeah.
Do you see any role for your foundation in video game hardware preservation?
Okay, the question was, do we see a role in the Video Game History Foundation for hardware preservation? Did you have an answer? Because I heard an inhale.
No. I
Okay.
don't.
Okay.
That was the inhale list.
So, when you say hardware preservation, are you talking about like replication of hardware? Or are you talking about maintaining vintage hardware? Because the answer to both of those, I think, is no. There's been so much amazing work in. The MAME project, for example, is something that we always point at, and we're like, these guys are amazing, right? They have documented to an incredible extent all of this hardware that can play games. We're not going to be able to do that. If there's a place for us, preserving hardware, it would be like, I don't know, like something one of a kind, right? Like if someone donated to us. I was going to say the Nintendo PlayStation, but I think we just send that to the strong. It's like, I don't want this thing. This is too big for us.
We have a one-of-a-kind piece of hardware that we'll talk about on Saturday. We're not bringing it up just now.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Oh,
I better go to the talk.
Oh, goodness. All right.
Is that kind of what you're asking about? Yeah. No, it's just not. So the other thing about finding your niche, right, is like, well, what are you actually good at? You know what I mean? Like, we don't have hardware people on staff right now, right? And so, something that I didn't really get into when I was like, here's what we do, is like, it was a 5-year process to get to here's what we do, because it's just navigating, like, okay, what needs doing, what are we good at? Honestly, like, if to do this at all, it's like, what are you excited about? You know what I mean? What's going to keep you motivated? And we don't have anyone on staff currently that's like a hardware person. So that's just not what we're equipped or interested in doing.
I think another, not to talk about hardware directly, but just in terms of that sort of like, because there is a very active community around that kind of maintenance stuff. A really interesting thing that happened recently, and seems like it's going a very different direction, is the interactive fiction community recently founded. There was a nonprofit called the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation, which exists to like maintain source code for like interactive fiction tech and the websites where people have interactive fiction games hosted and stuff. And it's like they kind of found a solution internally within their community. And I almost, obviously something like, arcade maintenance is a big diaspora, it's very scattered, but like I almost wonder that like the people who are the experts in that subject, like I would almost encourage them to find a community solution to have some kind of permanent repository for that kind of information. Because we can't all do it.
Yeah. All right. Yes.
So following you for the past couple of years, it feels like one of the biggest roadblocks has been current publisher buy-in. Like, it's very unlikely that like Nintendo, Microsoft are going to come to you and be like, here you go, Frank, here's a bunch of stuff. It feels like recently with Digital Eclipse's Atari 50th anniversary collection, to me it's one of the first times that mainstream press actually recognized like, whoa, this is an awesome storytelling method, this is an awesome preservation method. Do you feel like that release is maybe starting to turn the tide a little bit, or do you feel like there's actually been some more
Interesting
from publisher buy-in with compilation releases like the Atari Victory Collection to aid in your goals?
So I'll try to summarize that as best I can. So the question was essentially that a recognition that one of our roadblocks perhaps has been game company buy-in, and we're not getting donations from Nintendo of their source code or anything like that. And using the Digital Eclipse's Atari 50th compilation. Anyone play that this past year? Yeah, a lot of you. That's great. God, they did an incredible job. And like, so that product does a really good job of contextualizing Atari by using source materials. And the question was, did that, and people noticed, right? So the question was, is that perhaps turning the tide on things? Honestly, it might be too early to tell. I think it might turn the tides theoretically on other commercial products from Digital Eclipse. And I should specify, just in case it's not known, like I used to work for Digital Eclipse. I used to produce collections like this. I don't anymore because I do this. But I think that was a unique situation where Atari is actually a pretty small company. And from what I understand, the lawyers who worked with the team at Digital Eclipse were, I don't want to say the word risky, but they felt a lot more confident in being able to show some of this material than perhaps some publishers that they worked with in the past were. So I hope that it's encouraging for things like commercial products. I don't know that it really affects our work at the foundation so much. Do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I think the real, if there is like a slow change I'm noticing, I think, and we've talked about this, is the idea that just there has not been a concept of re-commercializing some of this stuff before.
Yep.
And like previously that had been like, games, like there was not in like the NES era, not a notion of re-releasing a game you had done in a future console. Now that there is sort of a move towards doing more of these retro collections, I think if there's any change, I think it may just be beginning to incorporate like, behind the scenes stuff is also interesting into that same gradual push towards having more kind of compilation sets and things and self-curated museums and whatnot. But in a lot of cases, they don't have those things anymore because they got rid of them and their ex-employees took them home and they ended up at the Straw Museum of Play or with us. So I think it's not necessarily shaking anything loose yet, I think it's fair to say, but
yeah, but one thing that we do that maybe is shaking things loose is providing material that gets commercially used. We've provided lost box art for re-releases, like Zombies Ate My Neighbors was re-released by Limited Run, and Konami's like, yeah, we don't have that stuff. Why would we have that stuff? But we do. We have it on film for some reason. We have the original box art composites. So if anyone got that collection, there's a nice poster that like came from our film of the old lady like screaming on the cover. Like we have that on 8.5 by 11 transparency. It's beautiful. Such good quality. Does that answer your question? Okay. Hands. Yes.
Do you do anything to document or preserve the end user experience, like the common knowledge if you blow on the cartridge? Like that community kind of evolved spontaneously around consuming.
So the question was, do we capture essentially the player experience? Is that a good shorthand? So our ambitions are to do that for sure. The way that we're able to do that currently is really the magazines, right? The magazines aren't going to completely capture that game experience, right? But given time, resources, et cetera, we think it's the densest form of player experience, being able to access as many talking heads as you can from a time period, right? An example I'll give is we helped a documentary crew who worked on a movie about Earthbound. They did a documentary about Earthbound. I don't think it's out yet, but they came over and we were able to pull every review of Earthbound for them, and it really colored. These aren't like normal, like non-critic reviews, obviously, right? They're all critics, but But given that we had like 6 of them, like it kind of colored how the general public might have perceived this game in its time. So that's our way of doing that. Are there better ways of doing it? Absolutely. We just don't have projects for that yet.
I do kind of have another answer to it too. Is the folks who are doing this work of the oral history and whatnot they are doing it in academia, and there are folks presenting this weekend at Mages at MAGFest presenting about a lot of it. Go to AJ Rackport's panel about melee culture; it's going to be great. They then publish their research, and we buy a copy of it and put it on our shelves.
Yeah.
So we can't fund it directly yet, but we try to collect relevant, interesting things that reflect on gaming culture, so we can have a record of it.
One of my favorite projects in recent memory was from the UK National Video Game Museum. Like right when the pandemic hit and Animal Crossing came out, they're like, let's start an Animal Crossing project. And they just collected people's experiences playing Animal Crossing. Like they got people to write in like about, what they did during the pandemic playing Animal Crossing. Like they captured that moment, and they have a permanent collection that is like, this really kind of weird, important moment, which is, you all probably remember, like Animal Crossing and the pandemic dropped at the same time, and that was like everyone's pandemic game, and they captured that player experience beautifully, and I'd love to see more projects like that, and I'd love to see us evolve to take on projects like that. All right.
Show them the back.
Yeah, all the way in the back. No, not you. White shirt. Yeah.
So when a language barrier comes up in your work, how do you get around it?
The question was, when a language barrier comes up, how do we get around it in our work? So are you thinking more in terms of communicating with humans or reading source material?
Both, basically.
Okay, both. The Google Translate app is great. it's the short version of that, but it hasn't come up for me. Has it come up for you?
I think kind of a similar answer. When we did the Simcopter 64 article, there were times where it was like, oh, there's dialogue visible on screen. I will just try to write this into Google Translate and see if we can get it right. I think to the extent that it comes up, I think it really is just on collecting materials. I think we tend to prioritize English language material, specifically American material, just because it's easier for us to collect.
It's cheaper to ship is the big thing, yeah.
One of those things too, but also in some cases, like I don't know how to find some things in Japan. Like I'm sure there are like a lot of exciting Japanese game magazines that aren't Famitsu. I just don't know a whole lot about them. Like if there is a barrier, I think it may just be towards what is easier for us to collect, and there is still so much in the American English language pop. That's kind of where our focus is right now.
Yeah. All right, Hans. All right, you were first.
What's the strategy for game industry pitch building in terms of lobbying for the foundation to get better relations with industry preservation?
Okay, so the question, correct me if I didn't get this right, is what is the sort of strategy for bridging relations with game companies in terms of getting them to soften up their stance on things? So, I mean, the sort of easy automatic one is something that I kind of alluded to earlier, which is just like we're always around. You know what I mean? Like, we have publishers coming through the office quite a bit because like part of the Digital Eclipse tour is let's go visit the foundation, you know what I mean? And they talk to most publishers. So people have gotten to know us and get excited about what we're doing and things like that.
I think it's very funny whenever we have a visitor from the industry, there's always one thing to get like laser focused on. Like when Todd Fry came by, who did some of the Atari games, he was like, I want to see your 3DO stuff. Where's the 3DO stuff? And he was very excited about it.
Yeah. Or someone from Nintendo was just like, you have Nintendo Power #1? So yeah, there's like 30 of those on eBay right now, but yeah, sure. You know, that I don't know if that's so much a strategy as much as circumstance, but it seems to work. The other stuff was that we try to get companies involved when it makes sense. For example, you know, I talked about that arcade baseball game, Power Up Baseball. You know, we communicated with the company that still exists that created it, Incredible Technologies, and they were really happy and excited with the way that we handled it, and we now have a good relationship with them. In fact, we showed Replay Magazine earlier. They sent us all their replays that they weren't using anymore, which is great. So we have way more of those than the Library of Congress does. like the Monkey Island stream, Lucasfilm didn't actually get involved, but we talked to them before we did anything, right? And I don't know, the analogy I often come up with is like poking the bear, we're just kind of slowly like poking at things and being like, is this okay? Is this okay? Because our vision is that, yeah, source code's scary, fine, but like we think that source material that company archives, contain, like that it shouldn't be weird that stuff gets donated to an archive for study. Like we're big believers in studying video game source material, and so really, if there's a strategy, it's really the publishing that we do on our blog for the most part. Like we don't do a ton of it, but when we do, we try to make it fit that mission of bridging that gap, of softening that barrier of amount of analogies.
Yeah, well, I think more broadly about bridge building, I think within like the gaming, citizen archivist community, I think there is often this kind of refrain you hear about where it's kind of antagonistic towards folks in the industry. And I think just being the face that is saying, we can do this responsibly is itself a bridge building act.
There's a weird perception that people have about how things, there's a lot of Duke Nukem stuff leaking lately. I don't know if you guys have seen all this stuff.
That's like the most Duke Nukem in the last 20 years.
And I keep seeing people being like, oh, I bet Randy Pitchford is pissed. He's like, I don't care.
People are talking about Duke Nukem again. That is a victory.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we still have some time. Hans, yes, you were first.
Yeah, so I have a background in digital history. And one of the questions I had and issues I ran into was how do you guys deal with sort of contextualizing video game history in a larger framework of like the historical, like American history, for instance, in terms of like bridging that gap, sort of where, for instance, the issues I had is like I found a lot of scholarship dealing with historians talking about video games and how they can build on one another and create this genre, but not a whole lot on like how video games came out of the Cold War environment or how they dealt with stuff in the 90s and stuff like that. Do you guys deal with that much? Or
so the question was about how we are, if we're contextualizing game history in part of a broader history that's not just about video games, but in terms of American history, international history, world culture. I think it's interesting because every institution kind of has a different angle on that. The Strong Museum of Play I love to mention because their angle is play. So like they contextualize video games in the history of like action figures. They have an exhibit where it's like The Sims next to a physical dollhouse. So that's kind of their angle.
Computer History Museum, another angle, right?
Yeah, they're the history of Silicon Valley. I think it is a strength, and also in that angle maybe a limitation that our angle really is like the history of the video game industry, that we are kind of coming at it from that perspective, which I try to look at a broader picture. I think you always get a richer story zooming out, but we don't have any deliberate, let's connect this out to XYZ because we are specifically focusing on game history. I think we determined that, in the United States, I'm the only person who's a video game history librarian because there are other folks who are working with that stuff, but it is in some other broader context working with other materials. It gives us a focus that I think is good in terms of drilling down to some things that may not necessarily make it to other institutions, but in terms of connecting it back to broader trends in American history, things like that, we don't really go too far in that direction unless it kind of makes sense for the story we're telling, just because that's the focus of our institution. But there are, other places even when I was at American University, their game program was all from the communications lens and persuasive play and things like that. That's just kind of the focus that we have as our organization and not so much in the broader contextual stuff.
Okay, Hans. First person I saw was you. Yep.
You mentioned legal challenges about preserving gaming history and gaming material, and something that brought to my mind was not game delays, but the recent Max deletions, and how the people who created these properties had no access to the master files to even preserve them anywhere else. Do you find that being an official foundation as opposed to a citizen archivist gives you any kind of in or leverage for something that might otherwise have been under intellectual property or ceded to a company or something like that?
It's a rough, good question. So the question was essentially framed around a lot of the deletions from HBO Max. I can't believe Looney Tunes is gone. That's crazy. Around essentially like games are digital now, and people don't tend to have access, even internally, the people who made them, to that material anymore. And the question, again, correct me if I didn't get this right, is essentially, do we, with our status, with how we're perceived, have any better access to that stuff? So not like right now, but that's part of the sort of bridging the gap thing, right? Like people ask us, how are you preserving online games? How are you preserving digital only games, things like that? And our answer is like, well, we're not right now. We're building a future where that can happen. Like we're like that's jumping the gun a little bit. Like we want, when games shut down, for like their source repositories to be donated to an archive, so that people can still tinker with them. Another way of answering that is, because of our status, people maybe send us stuff sometimes that they shouldn't. And
it goes in a drawer.
We have a time capsule for when we're not going to go to jail.
I think what's copyright term, 95 years at this point?
So yeah, it's a 100-year time capsule.
When we're all dead.
Yeah. I don't want to tell the story because I might out the people. Okay. All right, hands. We still got time, seems like. You. Yes.
Is there anything, does the Video Game History Foundation have like any major plans for 2023 that you could say or you can hint at or anything? Or?
Okay, so the question was any major plans for 2023 to say or hint at. Really, it's this digital access portal that we're working on. I don't want to like overpromise, like we're gonna, turn the lights on and our entire catalog's online. That's not realistic. That's not what's happening, right? But we're recognizing, like if you think back to the presentation when I was talking about how like our current strategy for magazine access is put them on the Internet Archive and pray, right? Like we're trying to, we're addressing that as best we can. We're trying to figure out how to use our library status to get people access in a way that is legal and safe and probably not going to go away. It's a big part of it, but do you want to talk a little bit on this?
No, yeah, I think it's just starting that. So I started at the foundation last February, and since then I have been working the entire time on getting all of our systems working for our various library catalogs and platforms, getting them talking to each other, cataloging everything. And I think in terms of like what's happening next year, I think just having some of that exposed is kind of where I want to go with that. Like we're not going to have every collection up, but like we'll have something that you can use in the portal. Like I think that's kind of what we want to shoot.
Yeah, so the hope this year is to have sort of a first pass, like here's what it's like, here's a few special collections that you haven't seen before, and grow it from there and sort of exhibit the promise of what it is, what our vision is. It's just, again, we can't put everything online because it's just too much labor.
We're getting the show floor model ready, essentially.
Yeah. So behind you was another hand. Yes.
So during your presentation, you mentioned having sort of a pop-up museum.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And if you're trying to do that on a smaller scale, what would you recommend?
Interesting. So the question was, I showed in the presentation a pop-up museum that we did at Portland Retro Gaming Expo. So the question is, what does that look like? And what was the second part?
If you're trying to do it on like a maybe smaller scale,
Then if we're trying to do it on a smaller scale, what would we recommend? So there's a museum here at MAGFest. Have you guys been to that? We approach these a little bit different. So the museum exhibits that we do, these little pop-up museums, it's really me and Kelsey Lewin, and I think it's us cosplaying museum curators. You know what I mean? Like, because we don't really want to run a museum, but it sounds fun, right? And so when we build exhibits, I don't know if I would recommend the way we do it because we kind of overdo it. But we, instead of, a typical museum at these shows tends to be like, here's a lot of vintage hardware and it works, and come experience what gameplay was in its time, right? That's a great approach. I'm not disparaging that approach. We're more interested in telling more specific stories, right? So like that exhibit, for example, was the history of Pac-Man. We did one in 2018, I think, that was like the 30-year timeline history of the Nintendo Entertainment System from the Famicom to now, right? And if we have any sort of, the way that we do it, and this would also double as the advice, is that we can't provide everything. We have to sort of know who has what, right? And it's really just figure out the story you want to tell, figure out who has the stuff, and try to, get it on loan, essentially, instead of, but that's if you're taking our approach, which is we're telling this specific story right now.
But in terms of even small scale stuff, I think the difference between having just like a thing that works versus having a story behind it, I was trying to think just now, like what would be like the smallest scale museum you could do, and I thought like a really sun-bleached NES that doesn't work anymore. And it's like, perhaps sitting by itself, not interesting, but if you can come up with a compelling little placard to explain the decay of hardware or something, like you can turn that into an exhibit. Like that's, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. We are out of time, but thank you all for coming, for all the questions, and we'll stick around for a little bit as well. Thank you.